He ripped a medical insulin bag from a 12-year-old boy's hands and tossed it into a storm drain, while the child stood there crashing. HOA agent Travis Lane thought his authority mattered more than a kid's life and acted with chilling arrogance. But he had no idea the boy's mother was a former prosecutor, with evidence, the law, and fury on her side. Just wait until you see how she turned a neighborhood outrage into a national reckoning, and why justice didn't just knock. It kicked the door down. Rachel Stanton had just pulled a tray of muffins from the oven when the pounding started. Not a knock. Not even a doorbell. Full force, angry fists hammering the wood like someone was trying to break it down. Her breath caught. She dropped the oven mitts and rushed toward the front door, heart thudding with that instinctual, maternal dread. She flung it open. There, standing like a smug statue of petty authority, was Travis Lane, the local HOA agent, a man she'd seen slinking around the cul-de-sac with a tablet in hand and a permanent scowl carved into his thick, red face. Today, though, he wasn't scowling. He looked resolved, determined, like someone who thought he was about to become important. He didn't say hello, didn't introduce himself. His eyes weren't on her. They were locked onto her son, 12-year-old Logan, who stood behind her with his medical pack slung over his shoulder. A red-faced, breathless kid just back from walking the dog. The bright orange letters on the side of his insulated bag were impossible to miss. Insulin, emergency use only. Logan barely had time to process what was happening. Travis pointed at the bag. "This is unauthorized storage of medical substances on shared property," he said, his voice flat, official, and terrifyingly robotic. Then, without asking, without hesitation, he stepped forward, grabbed the strap from Logan's shoulder, and yanked. "Hey!" Rachel moved to intercept, her instincts screaming. But he was already turning, already walking off her porch like he owned the neighborhood, like he owned her. Logan's eyes went wide. Rachel shouted something. She'd never remember what, but Travis didn't stop. He marched straight to the curb, past the welcome mat that said family first, past the flower bed Logan had helped plant last spring. His boots stomped over grass like it meant nothing. At the edge of the street, where the storm drain opened its rusted mouth, he dropped into a squat. And without ceremony, like he was tossing a piece of trash, he hurled the bag into the gutter. Rachel froze. Time seemed to collapse. For a split second, everything was quiet except the sound of the plastic case clattering into darkness, vanishing with a final splash. Then Logan made a sound she'd never forget, a high, keening inhale that caught in his throat. His knees buckled. He dropped to the porch, eyes fluttering. His fingers were trembling. "No, no, no, no," she whispered, diving toward him, already reaching for the glucose tabs she kept in her pocket out of habit. His face was pale, too pale, the kind of pale that meant his blood sugar was bottoming out fast. She looked up. Travis was still standing there, watching. And then, he had the audacity to shrug. "HOA warned you," he said. "Rules apply to everyone." His words hit her like a punch. They didn't even make sense. They couldn't. There was no rule, no notice, no fine, nothing in the bylaws that could possibly justify this. And even if there had been, this was a child, her child. And he was crashing. Rachel's hands were shaking as she ripped open a glucose tab and forced it into Logan's mouth. He was responsive, but barely. His pupils were dilating unevenly. His lips were tinged gray. She didn't even notice that she was screaming. Not at Travis, not at anyone in particular, just screaming. From terror, from rage, from the unbearable panic of knowing she might be seconds too late. Travis simply turned and walked away. He didn't run. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look back. Because in his mind, he hadn't just thrown insulin into a storm drain, he'd thrown power. He'd made a point. He'd reminded the Stantons and everyone else on Chestnut Drive who really made the rules here. But what Travis Lane didn't know, not yet, was who Rachel Stanton really was and what she was about to become. "His sugar's crashing," a voice screamed from across the street. Rachel barely registered it before she saw her neighbor Carol, an older woman in her late 60s, barefoot and panicked, sprinting toward her across the lawn, clutching a glucose tab like it was a live grenade. Her hair was wild, her robe half open, her eyes already filling with tears. Rachel was still kneeling beside Logan, her son's body trembling in her arms. He was conscious, but barely. His skin had gone cold and clammy. His lips were pale, his breath shallow and ragged. His head kept lolling backward, like he couldn't find the strength to hold it up anymore. Carol dropped to her knees beside them, her hands shaking as she shoved the glucose tab into Rachel's palm. "Put it in his cheek. Fast." Rachel nodded, her own hands slick with sweat. Her vision blurred, not from tears, not yet, but from the sheer volume of adrenaline tearing through her body. She pushed the glucose between his gums and cheek and started rubbing gently, praying it would absorb in time. But Logan's eyes were rolling back and a tremor started in his jaw. Rachel's chest locked. The world narrowed to one horrifying reality. This might not work fast enough. Without thinking, she fumbled for her emergency injector, always packed, always loaded. She tore the cap off and, through shaking fingers, plunged the needle into his thigh with a controlled push. Click. Injection. "Come on, baby," she whispered. "Come back." The longest 15 seconds of her life followed. Then Logan gasped, a deep, sudden inhale that sounded like surfacing from underwater. His back arched, his body jerked. And then his eyes focused. He was back. Rachel collapsed forward, her forehead against his, her arms around him, sobbing in relief. Carol was crying too, big, shaking sobs that sounded almost angry. "It's okay," Rachel whispered over and over again. "You're okay. I've got you. I've got you." They sat on the porch like that, the boy trembling in her arms, the neighbors shaking beside them as people gathered in the street. No one was speaking. A few held up phones, silently recording, too stunned to offer help. Others whispered. It didn't feel real. One teenage boy across the road, holding a burrito in one hand and his phone in the other, muttered to his friend, "Bro, I thought this was some kind of HOA prank or like a skit." Then the kid started choking, "Man, that ain't funny. That's just ked." The ambulance took 12 minutes to arrive. The paramedics praised Rachel's fast response, said she'd saved his life, said 1 minute more and he could have slipped into a coma, said she did everything right. But Rachel didn't feel right. She felt violated, like someone had broken into her home and attacked her child, in daylight, with neighbors watching, and called it regulation. That night, long after Logan was asleep in the hospital under observation, and Carol had gone home to lie down with a bottle of wine and a panic attack, Rachel sat at her kitchen table with the lights off and dialed 911. The dispatcher picked up after the first ring. 911, what's your emergency? Rachel opened her mouth, paused, swallowed the tremble in her throat. The dispatcher continued, a little more impatient now. Ma'am, is someone hurt? Was there a domestic disturbance? Did your dog attack a neighbor? Rachel let out a dry, joyless laugh. No, she said. My dog didn't attack anyone. She stared out the window into the dark, where the storm drain still sat open like an unpunished crime. But someone nearly killed my son, she said, her voice turning steel, on purpose, over a rule book. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Rachel didn't fill it. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, the second she said it out loud, something fundamental shifted in her. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a weapon. The cop arrived late, not rushed, not concerned, just present. His cruiser coasted to a casual stop in front of Rachel's house, lights off, engine humming like he had nowhere better to be. When he finally stepped out, he didn't even approach the porch. He stood by his open door, one hand resting on his belt, the other holding a notepad he never bothered to open. Rachel met him halfway. Logan was still at the hospital under overnight observation. She was running on half a cup of cold coffee and pure adrenaline. Her shirt was stained, her eyes sharper than razors. I need to report an assault on a minor, she began. The officer blinked once, slow. What kind of assault? Rachel narrowed her eyes. A representative from the HOA confiscated my son's life-saving medication. He then deliberately destroyed it by throwing it into the storm drain. My son suffered a hypoglycemic episode as a result. He could have died. She expected shock, alarm, action. What she got was a shrug. Yeah, well, that sounds like HOA stuff, he said lazily. We try not to get involved in their matters. You'll want to file a complaint with their board. Rachel stared at him, stunned. A board? He nearly killed my son. I'm not saying it was okay, the officer replied, but his tone suggested otherwise. I'm saying it's political. These associations have their own internal procedures. And trust me, ma'am, picking a fight with them is messy. She didn't answer. Not at first. She just looked at him, noted the way he avoided her eyes, noted the subtle twitch in his jaw when she didn't back down, noted everything. Then she turned around and walked back into her house. She didn't slam the door. She didn't curse. She didn't need to. She was already miles ahead. By nightfall, she'd pulled footage from her neighbor's Ring camera, a wide, clear shot of Travis Lane snatching the insulin bag and tossing it into the drain. She uploaded the file to 3 separate drives. Then she contacted EMS and requested a full transcription of the 911 call and the paramedics' medical report. She logged every second of the timeline, documented every physical symptom Logan had shown, and cross-referenced it with ADA federal health standards. The next morning, while other parents were packing school lunches, Rachel was sitting across from a senior litigation attorney in downtown Irvine, dropping a flash drive on his desk like a silent bomb. He plugged it in, watched the footage in silence. At the moment Travis hurled the bag into the gutter, the attorney paused the video, looked up at Rachel. She met his gaze evenly. I'm going to need a little more information, he said quietly. Rachel didn't flinch. You'll have it. Because here's what no one in Chestnut Ridge HOA had bothered to learn. Rachel Stanton wasn't just a mom. She was a former investigator for the Orange County District Attorney's Office. 8 years, 267 cases. She had specialized in cases involving child endangerment, elder abuse, and civil rights violations. Her weapon was the law, and she wielded it with surgical precision. For over a decade, she'd prosecuted people who thought they were untouchable, people who used systems, loopholes, and authority as shields while trampling the vulnerable. Her badge had never been about power. It had been about protection. Now, the badge was gone, but the instinct remained. And someone had just harmed her son. Under California Penal Code 422.7, it was a felony to intentionally cause harm to a vulnerable individual, especially a child, due to reckless disregard for health or safety. Rachel didn't need a second opinion. She needed a war plan. Forgiveness wasn't on the table. Not anymore. Not for Travis Lane. Not for the HOA board that enabled him. Not for a neighborhood that stood by while her son convulsed on a wooden porch in broad daylight. Some mothers grieve in silence. Some pray, some forgive. Rachel Stanton filed lawsuits, federal ones. The kind that tore through public records, uncovered every HOA memo, subpoenaed every meeting transcript, and forced liability out of hiding like cockroaches, fleeing from light. And she was just getting started. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in the community clubhouse, the kind of beige, underfunded room with cold folding chairs, cheap carpet, and lukewarm coffee in a stained silver urn. Normally, these gatherings were sleepy affairs, a handful of retirees complaining about lawn heights or mailbox paint colors, but not this time. This time, Rachel Stanton walked in like thunder. She wasn't alone. At her left side walked attorney Benjamin Cross, a seasoned civil litigator with a reputation for making HOA boards cry in mediation. Crisp suit, narrow briefcase, eyes like a hawk. At her right, a local news reporter, Elena Vargas, Channel 7, stepped in with a shoulder camera operator and a press badge swinging from her neck. But it was who followed behind them that drew every eye in the room, Logan. He wore jeans, sneakers, and a plain black hoodie. But what stood out most was the medical sensor strapped to his arm, blinking in soft blue pulses, a continuous glucose monitor that wrapped around his upper shoulder like a quiet reminder of what was nearly taken from him. He didn't smile, he didn't speak, he didn't need to. The room, filled with board members, residents, and HOA volunteers, shifted in their seats. Some sat up straighter, Others whispered behind raised hands. Travis Lane, Chishu, seated at the center table like a king among clerks, lifted his head. For the first time since the incident, he locked eyes with Rachel. She did not look away. She moved toward the front and stood without asking for permission. Benjamin placed a manila folder on the table in front of the board. Elena nodded to the camera operator, who pressed the red record button without hesitation. Rachel's voice, when it came, was low, even, and deadly calm. In this folder is a copy of the Ring camera footage from April 3rd at 4:41 p.m. It shows Travis Lane, acting under the authority of this HOA, forcibly removing a clearly labeled insulin bag from my 12-year-old son's possession and disposing of it in a storm drain. She placed a second document next to the folder. This is Logan Stanton's medical diagnosis. Type 1 diabetes, emergency-dependent insulin regulation. He suffered a near-fatal hypoglycemic episode following that event. Paramedic transcripts, time-stamped vitals, and ER records confirm that he was within minutes of entering a diabetic coma. Travis shifted in his seat, his lips parted slightly. One of the board members reached for a cup of water, hands trembling. Rachel continued. This was not a misunderstanding. It was not a clerical error. It was a deliberate act of aggression. You didn't just dispose of medical property. You put a child's life in danger. That's not an HOA infraction. That's federal. Silence. You violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. You violated state child endangerment statutes. You violated basic human decency. But most of all, she leaned slightly forward, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. You underestimated the wrong mother. Travis began to stand. Rachel's attorney raised one hand. I wouldn't, he said flatly. The room stirred. Two other attendees stood by the exit. Channel 7's crew was now panning directly toward Travis. The red light on the camera blinked steadily. He sat back down, jaw tight, palms pressed flat to the table. For the first time, Travis Lane looked small. His usual smugness had drained from his face, replaced with something raw, something foreign. Fear. The board chair tried to mumble something about protocol, about reviewing the footage in private session, but Rachel cut through again. No, we're not hiding this. Not behind HOA confidentiality. Not behind some internal review. This happened in public. The world will see it, and when the state opens its case, they'll see it too. Another beat of silence. Rachel turned to her son, who was watching everything with quiet intensity. She put a hand on his shoulder and gave it a small, silent squeeze. Then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the door, her team falling in beside her. She didn't need a vote. She didn't need applause. She had everything she needed already. Evidence, motive, federal law, and a courtroom waiting with her name on it. Exactly 1 week after the HOA meeting, Rachel's phone rang at 8:03 a.m. She had been expecting the call, not hoping, not wishing, but expecting. She answered on the first ring. This is Stanton. The voice on the other end was clear, official, and clipped with precision. Miss Stanton, this is Special Investigator Marin Hill with the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations. I'm joined by Agent Samuel Ortega from the Department of Health and Human Services, Office for Civil Rights. We've reviewed the evidence you submitted, along with the ring footage, medical documentation, and witness statements. A pause. Controlled. Procedural. Rachel said nothing. She let them speak. We're opening a federal investigation into the April 3rd incident involving your son. Based on preliminary findings, probable cause exists to pursue criminal charges against Mr. Travis Lane. We'll be coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office in your district for prosecution. Rachel closed her eyes for a beat. She allowed herself a single, soundless exhale. Not relief, not celebration, but focus. Focus sharpened by fury and honed by law. What are the charges? She asked calmly. Marin didn't hesitate. Count 1. Violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II, you've shown, denial of reasonable accommodation and access to necessary medical devices. Count 2. Willful endangerment of a minor under federal jurisdiction, 18 U.S.C. Section 1111, due to deliberate interference with essential life-saving medication. Count 3. Destruction of a prescription pharmaceutical substance with malicious intent, classified under Section 333(e)(2)(a) of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Rachel didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't smile. "Good," she said. "Let me know if you need deposition scheduling. I'll make time." The call ended, and the news broke like a thunderclap. Within 48 hours, the story spread across the county. A diabetic child, a destroyed vial of insulin, a neighborhood association president turned wannabe dictator. The headlines practically wrote themselves. HOA agent facing federal charges after confiscating child's insulin. Justice for Logan, U.S. launches investigation into suburban negligence. ADA violation sparks national debate over HOA authority. Rachel never sought fame. She didn't return calls from talk shows. She ignored interview requests from tabloids. This wasn't about going viral. This was about accountability. The HOA, predictably, issued a public apology through a trembling PR intern and a hastily typed statement on their website. It included phrases like deep regret, unfortunate misunderstanding, and our thoughts are with the family. They even offered to reimburse the cost of the insulin, a gesture so offensively inadequate it might as well have been spit on a wound. Rachel didn't respond. She wasn't interested in their regret. She wanted consequences. She wanted every HOA in America to look at Travis Lane and feel the tremor of fear in their bones. She wanted a message carved into the concrete of every overreaching suburban institution. You are not above the law, and if you harm a child, especially mine, there will be no settlement, no silence, no escape. This wasn't vengeance. It was precedent, and she intended to make it federal, because this wasn't about her lawn, or mailbox colors, or petty notices taped to doors. This was about power, and what happened when it was abused by the small-minded under the guise of rules. This was about a man who saw a child with a medical device and chose to destroy it, believing his clipboard mattered more than a beating heart. This was about a system that had protected him until now, and what it would look like when that system shattered. Rachel didn't want an apology. She wanted a courtroom. She wanted a bench, a judge, and a record that would never be sealed. She wanted Travis Lane's name burned into federal archives, so that the next time some clipboard tyrant thought about enforcing a rule over a child's life, they'd stop and remember exactly how that ended the last time. Not with paperwork, but with handcuffs. The HOA's legal team looked exactly how Rachel expected. 3 men in ill-fitting suits who hadn't read their own bylaws in a decade and were now clinging to words like unfortunate miscommunication and procedural confusion, as if they were life rafts in a sinking ship. They stuttered. They hedged. They threw around phrases like standard protocol and misinterpretation of enforcement boundaries while sweating through their collars under the pressure of federal scrutiny and viral outrage. But Rachel didn't flinch. She didn't entertain their bureaucratic theater. Instead, she filed a lawsuit, $2.4 million. The breakdown was surgical. $1 million in punitive damages to make sure no one ever did this again. $800,000 in emotional distress, every second Logan spent seizing on that porch, every nightmare, every tremor. $300,000 for current and projected medical expenses, continuous glucose monitoring, psychological therapy, insulin refills, future risk mitigation. And $300,000 more for reckless endangerment of a medically vulnerable minor with lethal potential. That last line, her attorney wrote it, but the fire behind it, that was all Rachel. The announcement came at a press conference 2 days later, held in front of the federal courthouse, where the media had been camped out like wolves, sensing blood in the water. Rachel stood at the podium in a black blazer and white blouse. Her posture was calm, composed, but her eyes told a different story. They were coiled steel, controlled fury. Behind her stood Logan, quiet and composed, next to Benjamin Cross, her attorney, who held the lawsuit documents in a thick folder that might as well have been a blade. Dozens of cameras pointed at her. Microphones jutted toward her face. Reporters murmured, waiting for a soundbite. Rachel gave them more than that. "If my son dies," she said, her voice crisp and controlled, "because a grown man decided to prove a point, that's not a misunderstanding. That's not an error. That is a crime." Flashes erupted. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back muttered, "Damn," under their breath, barely audible over the clicking shutters. She continued, eyes steady. The HOA can call it an enforcement issue. They can call it poor judgment. but I call it what the law calls it, an act of deliberate negligence with intent to intimidate and a direct violation of federal protections afforded to disabled individuals. We are not here today because of a missing document. We are here because my son almost died on his own front porch, and someone thought they had the authority to decide whether he lived or not. That clip aired on CNN within the hour, then on MSNBC, then on Fox News, then Reddit got it, then TikTok. The algorithm didn't just favor it, it exploded. #Justice for Logan hit 1 million tags in 3 days. HOA tyranny trended by noon. Suburban parents, disability rights advocates, even a handful of federal lawmakers began weighing in. Influencers made videos breaking down the case. Legal analysts debated the charges. Memes flew, featuring Travis Lane's face photoshopped onto trash cans with captions like "Where insulin goes," apparently. Travis, meanwhile, tried to hide. He stopped answering calls, deleted his social media, even shaved his beard, reportedly, in an attempt to avoid being recognized at the grocery store. It didn't work. His face, caught mid-smirk from the doorbell cam footage, had become a symbol. It was printed on protest signs, on t-shirts. Someone even made a bobblehead. His moment of power had curdled into infamy, and no matter how many times the HOA's lawyers blinked into microphones and asked for understanding, the public wasn't buying it. Because Rachel Stanton wasn't chasing money, she was setting a precedent, and the whole world was watching. The courtroom was still, not silent. Still, the kind of stillness that happens just before the hammer drops. Travis Lane sat at the defense table, red-faced and dripping sweat. His hands trembled in his lap. His lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but Travis didn't react. His eyes were glued to the floor. Across from him, Rachel Stanton sat tall and composed. Logan beside her, quiet, watching everything. Judge Miriam Roth looked down from the bench, then removed her glasses slowly. "Mr. Lane," she said, her voice calm but cold. "You saw the medical markings. You knew it was insulin, but you chose to throw it away. Not because you were confused, not because you misunderstood. You chose power over compassion, control over common sense." She paused. This wasn't an accident. It was cruelty, and this court sees it for what it is. The air in the room tightened. Travis swallowed hard. His face twitched, but he said nothing. Outside, the HOA had already tried to make it go away. They offered Rachel a settlement, big money, public apology, non-disclosure. She refused. "We're not settling," she told the press the day before. "If my son dies because some grown man needed to flex his authority, that's not a mistake. It's a crime." Now, as the judge looked back toward her, Rachel stood. "I want the record," she said clearly. "Not just for us, for every family, so this never happens again." Her words echoed. Judge Roth gave a small nod. "Understood," she said. "This court will ensure that your son's name stands for something. This won't be buried, not behind policy, not behind money, not behind silence." She looked back at Travis one last time. "You chose to harm a child. Now you'll live with what that choice cost." Travis lowered his head. Not from shame, from defeat. Justice wasn't coming. It had already arrived. Travis Lane was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. No probation, no plea deal. The judge added mandatory psychological evaluation and counseling, citing a concerning pattern of authority misuse. He also imposed a $150,000 fine, not just for punishment, but for precedent. But that wasn't the end. After the verdict, more families came forward. Quiet voices, once scared to speak, now lit by Rachel's fight. Stories of medications taken, devices thrown out, children left in danger, all because of HOA rules. A class action lawsuit followed. The HOA paid $3.1 million in damages to affected families. Board members resigned, policies were rewritten, and Chestnut Ridge would never be the same. Logan, still recovering, kept his humor. In one of his first interviews, he opened his bag and held up 2 injector pens. "This one's my insulin," he said, "and this one just has a note inside." The reporter leaned in. Logan grinned. "It says, 'If you touch this, call my mom. She's the scary one.'" The clip went viral. Rachel didn't stop there. She launched a nonprofit, "Don't touch my kid." It helped parents nationwide understand their rights, fight back, and never feel alone in a system that often silenced them. When asked what drove her to keep going, Rachel replied, "Because he couldn't fight for himself, so I did." And across America, HOAs took notice. New boards were trained, laws were updated, pamphlets changed, and one unofficial rule spread like wildfire: never mess with a mom who has a law degree and a diabetic son.